Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and sit. Fuck that up. Hang on, I'll try that again. Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing all right, thanks. How's yourself?
Not too bad. Not too bad. We are recording this at the very end of November. We have Christmas in sight, and nothing could possibly go wrong with the world.
Good. That doesn't sound worrying whatsoever.
No. There is some fairly, apocalyptic news going on in Syria today. But let's not concern ourselves with impending Russian world domination, and worry instead about beats per minute.
Beats per minute. Okay, let's talk about beats per minute. Sorry, I don't know why I went off Kraftwerky in there, but we'll just gloss over that for the time being. What would you like to say about beats per minute, Andrew?
Well, we are talking today about the depths of side two of Help, and we're on to the middle of the McCartney trilogy, I believe. And I've just seen a face, which is a really, really interesting song. Even if you don't like it, I think it's interesting because of just how darn quick it is. Now, I've said before that actually one of the things that interests me about the Beatles is how up tempo their songs are, and even some of the more ballady type songs have a pace to them that makes them really interesting. I think we finally get to a song where the pace doesn't really serve the song, and as a result kind of masks quite a good piece of songwriting that lies underneath it. And I think I've just seen the bass rattles along. It does. It rattles along and creates a wrong. Interesting song, but just too darn quick. Macca, slow down.
Yeah, that's fair. If you, not that I imagine you have, but if one ever tries to play this on guitar, you've really got to be rock solid on your rhythm. It's a very hard song to keep a clip on. It's very, very fast indeed. It's not a song I particularly think highly of before coming to it for this podcast, and I've listened to it a few times and I've played it a few times and still not particularly struck on it. I don't think it's a bad song, but I think it's one where the reputation of the song greatly outstrips the actual value of the song, and I think that kind of does the song a disservice. I think it's a good album track. I don't think it's an awful lot better than that.
I think it's one of those, and I think we have covered this before, where and ironically, it's a flaw that we're persisting with here today. It's perfectly fine if you listen to it as part of the album. It comes and it goes in relatively short space of time, and you're left with an impression of this kind of bouncy rhythm, some interesting lyrical analogies, and the way in which the lines are split up and where the rhyme appears in the sentence. So there is that you kind of get the rhyme halfway through a sentence, so it sounds a little bit fresh and interesting. But then if you start to analyze it, if you start to look at it a little bit more closely, you then realize that actually there's not much there. It is a pop cultural illusion, and I think it's effectively the height of that sort of very kind of throwaway Beatlesy pop culture element. Pretty soon we're going to start to get more concerted attempts at writing things that have a deeper significance. Whether that's deliberate or not, I don't know. But this is the height of that kind of throwaway pop culture. Write it quickly, perform it, record it quickly, and then move on to something else. So doing what we're doing, attempt to talk about this for 20, 30, hopefully, God's sake, not 40 minutes, then you're kind of inviting criticism of yourselves a bit too much by giving it more than it actually deserves.
I think that's a far more articulate way of saying what I was trying to get across. But yes, absolutely.
Oh, I thought I was just waffling. But
oh well,
okay,
I mean,
thank you.
it can be two things. But yeah, I think the construction of the lyric is by far and away the most impressive thing about this.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. It's one of the ways that, for all that the song is very fast paced, but the lyric clips along, and it does do that kind of very not scattershot, that's not quite the right word, but that very at a clip pace of line very well. McCartney delivers it well as well. I think it's a well performed song as far as it goes, which is not very far because there's very little in the way of actual instrumentation on it other than McCartney's voice and the rhythm guitar. But that's effective. Like you said, the rhymes not just coming at the end of the line. That's a little bit of progress from what we've seen, especially from McCartney in this album so far. But it's all a bit superficial, I guess. It's not really expressing any sentiments we haven't heard 100 times before on Beatles. I say 100 times before. I think this is about the 80th song we've covered, so we've presumably heard it about 80 times before. But it's just, oh, I've seen a girl, I really like her, and I have fallen in love with her, and that's nice, but it's not exactly reinventing the wheel.
I was wondering if it forms an interesting partner or counterpunch to Another Girl from side one, where he's basically saying, "Oh, I've seen another girl, and you know what? She could be better than you." I think, well, which is the one that he saw for the first time and fell in love? Is it the one that he's with, or is it the one that he saw and is now urging the one that he's with to be more like? Um, I think it's. There's always that danger again, as we've said before, that you can ascribe too much meaning. Maybe he did see a beautiful one. Maybe this is what he thought of Jane Asher the first time he ever saw her, or maybe it's just a bunch of words that sounded nice to a rhythm that occurred on paper. I mean, whatever it is, I'm pretty sure that if we were to dive, it's in the lyric book. If we were to dive in the lyric book and he was in there, there's probably a deeper meaning to it now than there ever was at the time.
Yeah, I actually don't know whether this one's in the lyric book or not. I have to admit, it's one of those songs that I can't imagine that there is an awful lot to sort of dig out of it, other than what it is. I think it's a pretty surface lyric, and that's
Have you asked for the lyric book for Christmas so you can find out?
that's a very good question. Actually, I don't know whether I will be getting the lyric book for Christmas, but I have a
Ooh.
feeling that the answer is probably no. I think if I want that, I'm
No.
going to have to put my own hand in my pocket and shell out for it. But regardless, I think there's probably not an awful lot of detail that you can go into in this lyric, which is going to, you know, elucidate anything further than what it is, and that's fine. There's nothing, lyrics don't have to be deep to be effective. But I think again, the fact that this song is one that kind of emerges from this album as a goer, if you'll excuse the expression. Probably could have phrased that better. Throughout McCartney's post Beatles career, I do think throws a longer shadow for the song than it necessarily requires. It's a perfectly all right song. I'm not down on it as such, but the fact that he keeps coming back to it and keeps coming back to it and keeps coming back to it, I think probably lends it more significance than it necessarily has in terms of its own merits.
Okay, could you say the same? Would you go out on a limb and say the same then for the song that follows it on the album?
I think that there is some justification for that. Yes, this is a shallower lyric than Yesterday has, and we'll discuss that more in the next episode. I think there is a little bit more depth to lyric of
Okay.
Yesterday, but maybe not a huge amount. What about yourself? Would you go
Well,
that far?
I wonder if I mean yesterday is as we'll talk about in a couple of weeks' time when we meet to discuss that.
Yes.
We will obviously talk about the fact that it is, beautiful melody, well put together, really, really interesting, and a fascinating development. But you could also argue that it's another song that is this more than the sum of its parts, and that it has been ascribed a deeper meaning than it actually has. I think there's an interesting naivety to the lyrics of I've Just Seen the Face that I would say also transplants itself to quite a bit of McCartney's lyric writing of the period. And it's possible that that theme might get covered in the next edition. Stick around, folks. Anyway, we'll come back in 2 weeks' time, whatever it is. But yeah, but that's fine. It happens. So there's yeah, you take over. I'm falling apart at this point.
Okay, that's fine. I think it's also worth at least briefly touching on the one thing that this song doesn't have, which is it doesn't have a bass line. There's no bass in this song
Yeah.
whatsoever. That's an interesting choice. Of course, the next song famously doesn't have a bass line either. It also doesn't have anything else at all other than McCartney and the guitar, as far as the Beatles are concerned. It's curious to have those two songs sequenced in this way, and particularly for this song, it's not difficult to find a bass line for it, and it's a curious choice for McCartney not to have included one on it. It does make it feel much more folk rocky than if you ever hear any cover versions where there is a bass line or somebody's found some kind of bass line to play along with it. It roots it much more in kind of like contemporary 60s pop. Without that being there, it immediately feels much more folky.
That's quite interesting because watching various clips of Wings and then McCartney playing it live. It wasn't played live by the Beatles, but it was played live quite a bit by Wings in 76 and 75 and
Yeah,
76.
it's on Wings Over
And
America, right?
and yeah, I'll come to that in a sec. And then it's played a lot by McCartney from 91 to the present tour. Everything I've seen of it being played by McCartney and or Wings, he is playing acoustic guitar and someone else is playing bass. And in fact, I think on Wings Over America, if that was 76,
Yeah.
they're sort of they get chairs out and it looks like they're yeah, anyway. And so they're sitting down apart from the bass player who's standing behind them, and he refers to it as a toe tapper, which I think is quite interesting. But yeah, it's interesting that he has therefore chosen not to play the bass, that he would much rather do the strum along on the guitar. Of course, he's not picking the opening. He will leave that to someone else on Wings Over America. I think it's Jimmy McCulloch who's doing that on a 12 string, which is quite interesting that he's doing that. So there is that definite replication of the opening on the album. And I think in some respects actually that opening is almost the most interesting thing about the song, because it sort of suggests it's going to go one way, and I've almost kind of got in my head every time I hear that I almost think it's going to be the opening theme or the main theme in the Third Man, with yeah, the Zither music. That's where I think it's going to go. But then it turns into a completely different song, which is quite interesting. The rhythm of the opening is again completely different to where the song kicks in. I wonder why they put that on that. I don't know what the decision making process was with that. Whether George came along and said, "Oh yeah, I've got something that will go on," but of course it's an instrumental introduction, which is relatively uncommon for a lot of Beatles songs through that period.
Yeah, and again, it leans into that kind of very folk rock sort of thing, but it's much more. It's not. I was going to say it's much more explicitly folk rock. That's not exactly right. It's a different sort of strand of folk rock. So when you get a lot
Mm,
of that kind of very intricate finger picking, you think of Roger McGuinn, you think of the Byrds, all that kind of stuff. The kind of much faster paced rhythm guitar that drives the main body of the song has kind of it always reminds me of Subterranean Homesick Blues. It's got that kind of pace to it, which is a very different strand of folk rock. And it's quite interesting to see them sit together in a song like this, but it's only interesting in the abstract. I kind of agree with you. I'm not quite sure that these sit comfortably together, and that adds a sort of tension to the song that never really gets resolved because we never come back to that instrumental
Mm.
opening passage. We just get at the end, we just get na na da da lam, and poof, and we're done, and then off we go to yesterday, and that's all right. It's a perfectly reasonable conclusion to the song, but it just leaves this opening passage kind of orphaned. It's kind of just stuck out there by itself, not really achieving an awful lot. I mean, it's technically proficient. It's well played. It's got nice flourishes in it. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't quite bring the tension to the song that I think maybe it's meant to.
Subterranean Homesick Blues is an interesting one because for me it's not. I mean, maybe it does, and people who are technically proficient can shout me down, but I think from my listening of it, it's a song where the instrumentation and the rhythm is actually slower than you think,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
it's the pace of the lyrics that drives it, the pace of the singing, but actually it's not quite as hectic. um yeah, so kind of an interesting comparison. I
I think
should
that
point
I
out.
think I should sorry, just to say I think that's also why Subterranean Homesick Blues is a much more effective song.
Well, I mean, yeah, Subterranean Homesick Blues is pretty phenomenal. So I believe this is about 120 beats a minute. And doing a little bit of the old googling, it actually turns out 120 beats per minute is really quite effective if you want to listen to something whilst out doing a moderate paced run. Obviously, if you were going to go sprinting, you're after 180 beats per minute, but 120 beats per minute puts I've just seen the face. I've just seen the face. I've just seen a face into the same category as Gimme Gimme Gimme, Tragedy, Girls and Boys by Blur, and The One and Only by the great Chesney Hawkes. And if remember, folks, if you want a link between Chesney Hawkes and the Beatles, don't forget that Chesney's dad was in the Tremolos. In fact, Chesney is now in the Tremolos himself. I'm pretty certain, actually, I forgot to have this up on screen, but I'm pretty certain that the Tremolos had a hit in '66 or '67 with a Beatles cover. I can't remember what it was, but while JG is saying something very interesting, I will just look it up and then I'll just shout it out when I find it. So
Good. Well, we'll look forward to that. I didn't realize that the Tremolos had become a generational band. That's a curious thing for
Good
them
Day
to become.
Sunshine.
Hey, excellent.
Well, it was released as a single. It doesn't appear to have charted, but yeah, I know that I know next to nothing about the Tremolos. Yeah, other than, was it Silence is Golden? I think was
Yes.
their big smash. Yeah, but there you go. They seem to have hits across quite a few years, and they're still going, and that's fun and exciting for them. Yeah. The one thing that cropped up that I thought was really weird is that they were Brian Paul and the Tremolos up until early '66, where they just become the Tremolos. Presumably, Brian Paul was left, therefore. But their last album, released in November '65, was called Brian Paul is Here. So that was a North American release, but we know all about North American releases.
Well, yes, we
After
do.
after all, the Beatles are desperately trying to flog the reissues of all the North American releases at the moment. And of course, much as we love the Beatles, we don't necessarily conform to buying the many products that occur in Beatles land.
I don't have any great difficulty in admitting that I have no investment in those albums. But we've known for our mailbag that plenty of listeners do. Plenty of North American
Oh, it's
listeners
fine.
absolutely, those are the definitive versions of the album, even though,
Yeah.
they're not. But, that's fine. You grow up with what you grow up with. And this is also something I'll talk a bit about when we come back for yesterday in a couple of weeks. But um, yeah, you like the album that you like. You come across the music in the way that you come across it, and there's no right or wrong way to enjoy music. I would hate
Yeah.
to be kind of gatekeepery about it, but it's a curious one. Yeah, I think for I've just seen a face as well. It's it's got that pace that you mentioned, the fact that it's 120 beats per minute, is I'm not gonna say that without doing it that way. You're just gonna have to get used to it.
That's fine.
Um,
That's fine. You actually reminded me less of Kraftwerk and more of Fitter Happier from OK Computer.
That'll work too. That'll
Yeah,
work
yeah, yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. Not exactly out of the same ballpark.
No, indeed, indeed. But it's that sense of pace that I think ultimately slightly undermines the song. I think it makes it feel a little more trivial, and that's kind of a shame. Like, I understand why you would want to have something a little bit pacier in the middle of side two, and we do have to remember to consider side two, not just one long sequenced thing. But it makes sense, but I don't know. I just feel it works to undermine it that wee bit.
See, okay, right. So, incidentally, one of the things that that McDonald raises about this, I think it was McDonald, um, raised the fact that if this and the anachronistically, as you refer to it, we will come back to yesterday in a couple of weeks. Love that sentence. All kinds of weird things going on there. If they had been written and ready earlier, although yesterday, obviously, there's confusion about that. Would they have made the film? And McDonald seems to think that they would. Both this and yesterday would have made the film. Now, I can really picture it for this because it sort of fits. You can imagine some sort of zany chase going on while this is playing.
Bit of sped up footage.
Absolutely. I think it would have fitted almost perfectly the tone of the film. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is entirely up to you. Whereas I find it harder to imagine a scenario in this film that yesterday would have fitted into. Much easier, I think, for Hard Day's Night. But enough about that. So I think had it been ready earlier, I think it could easily been something that would have been visually effective.
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made for that. I mean, oh God, I'm not trying to. I'm both trying to and trying not to imagine what that would look like. But
I don't think you need to, because I think the Salisbury Plain songs, it would have fitted in quite nicely in there, and that's where I see it, or perhaps a chase in the Bahamas or something like that. There's loads of places where it could work, with people who really shouldn't be playing people from India, running around trying to get the ring off Ringo's finger. I mean, it writes itself.
Yeah,
it writes itself. Yeah. There you go.
No, I agree, but I also agree that I don't think yesterday would fit unless McCartney is plaintively singing to a kidnapped Ringo. Like, I don't think that's really going to. I don't think that's really going to fit in the film at all. So yeah.
But let's save discussions about yesterday for the future.
Hey, yeah, okay. We're going to have a lot of these chronological hiccups, aren't we? Yes.
Well, I think our listener is already bored of it. So.
Okay, let's quietly move on with our life. I suppose we also have to kind of mention, because it's the thing that always gets mentioned with I've Just Seen a Face, which is the sort of Simon and Garfunkel influence. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Simon and Garfunkel. I can't stand Paul Simon's voice, and I find them excessively boring. Bridge Over Troubled Water is one of the most dull albums I've ever heard in my life. And, because I've Just Seen a Face often gets compared to them, like the only Simon and Garfunkel I need in my life is I've Just Seen a Face. I'm happy to just leave it there.
Okay, this is a side of you I've not seen before. I wasn't aware of this. So, I mean, where do you stand on is it just Paul Simon? Are you okay with Bright Eyes?
Bright Eyes is fine, and honestly, I do like Sound of Silence. It's the one Simon and Garfunkel song I will concede that I do really like that song. Bright Eyes is fine, but it's very hard to get that. Right, the real test here, the real key is going to be, go on, name another song by Art Garfunkel.
Right, I don't need to. I genuinely don't need to. I was watching something the other, clips on YouTube rabbit holes, where where Lennon and Paul Simon were presenting something at the Grammys, and I can't remember. I think it was Best Female singer or vocal performance, and whoever it was that won it wasn't there, and Art Garfunkel came up to collect it on behalf of, you know, who I don't even. I think they asked him to do it for a bit of a joke, and he was wearing one of those comedy sort of non-tuxedo tops that is like a jumper or a t-shirt or something with the tuxedo, the lapels and the bow tie, on it, and hilarious. And there was some bants between them, in particular because you had, was it John and Paul, and therefore, I think he said, "Oh, I must be Ringo," or there was that sort of stuff that was fun.
Yeah, that sounds hilarious.
Yeah, okay, all right. I loved Graceland when I was a teenager. Graceland was an amazing album, and I do still like quite a lot of it. But I think it's the only Paul Simon album I ever bought. You and I did live with someone who was a big fan of Paul Simon at university.
Yes, that's true.
And that's about as much as I can remember. Oh, right, okay. Before, because I think we're clearly done on the song, so I will mention this. The only Paul Simon song you need to listen to is actually by Flight of the Conchords, and it's called Carol Brown, and it's effectively it's a parody update, but it's a beautiful song that is just like 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Have a listen to Flight of the Conchords, Carol Brown. It is one of the best songs of all time ever in the history of ever. Yeah, so there you go. That's my last relevant point about I've just seen a face.
I passed my last relevant point some distance back, so shall we score and move on?
Oh, yeah, do absolutely. But I'm going to give it a 5 and answer the door.
Okay, no problem. I am going to give it a 4, I think. Since Andrew has gone to answer the door, that means I get to say whatever I like, and there's nothing he can do about it, and he won't listen back to this. So, yeah, great. That means I've got away with something, and nobody can prove otherwise. You know what? Let's just wrap this episode up. You can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter @Beatles_ology. We are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. And you can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Andrew has returned now. He has no idea what I said whilst he was at the front door. Is there any final contribution you would like to make?
Yeah, 5's a bit harsh. Make it a 6, please.
Okay. Well, this has gone fabulously well. Please like, rate, and review us on what we're sober, on whatever podcatcher you're using, so that more people can find the show. It really does make a difference when you do that. So we would be most grateful if you would. Next episode, we have, well, it's the biggie. It's yesterday. But until then, keep listening.